I have been expecting you. Not hoping, not wondering, expecting, with the certainty of someone who has watched this pattern repeat itself enough times to stop being surprised by it. You hear something that unsettles you. You go about your life for a few days, and then quietly, without quite deciding to, you come back. You always come back. I will not waste your time with preamble about the stories we have shared before. The factory floor, the lighthouse, the forest at the edge of Millhaven. You remember them, or you do not. It changes nothing about what I have for you now. Because what I have for you now is different in a way that the others were not. And I want you to understand that difference before we begin. What I have for you now has no edges. A box without a label. A government signals analyst named Philip Crane who, in 1993, noticed something in a set of satellite images he was never meant to see. Who measured it? Who wrote it down? Who disappeared on September 30th of that year, 38 years old, leaving behind 3 folders, a reel of magnetic tape, and notations whose handwriting grows less steady with every page. The structures he found were growing then. No one has looked since. Keep your flashlight close, listener. It will not help. Act 1. The signal. What I am about to tell you was not meant to be found. Not by me, not by anyone. It existed in the particular obscurity that institutions reserve for things they cannot explain and dare not destroy, filed under a reference number that means nothing, in an archive subsection that appears in no index, in a building that was quietly decommissioned in 2003, and whose contents were, according to all official records, transferred to a central depository that does not appear to exist. I am a data archivist. I worked for a municipal records office in a city I will not name, processing the digitization of physical documents from defunct government agencies. Mostly it is exactly as interesting as it sounds. Procurement logs, maintenance schedules, personnel rosters for departments that ceased to exist before I was born. The sediment of bureaucracy, layer upon layer, each one duller than the last. In February of last year, I processed a box. It had no label. Not a missing label, not a faded one, simply no label at all, as though whoever packed it had considered the matter and decided, quite deliberately, that a label was not something this box should have. Inside, 3 manila folders, a reel of magnetic tape in a cracked plastic case, and a handwritten index on a single sheet of paper. The index was in a precise, unhurried hand. The name at the top read, Dr. Philip Crane, Meteorological Signals Division, Orion Project, 1993. I should have logged it and moved on. I did not move on. Philip Crane joined the Meteorological Signals Division in 1989. This I know from his personnel file, which was in the first folder. 34 years old at time of hire, degree in atmospheric physics from the University of Edinburgh, commendations in his first 3 years. A performance review from 1991 describing him as, and I quote the precise language of the document, methodical, thorough, and disinclined toward speculation. This last quality, the reviewer noted approvingly, made him well suited to the work. The work, as best I can reconstruct it from Crane's own notes, was the processing of imaging data from the Orion meteorological satellite network, a cluster of 4 satellites positioned to provide continuous atmospheric coverage of the North Atlantic corridor. The data was used for weather modeling, storm tracking, the ordinary, essential, unglamorous business of knowing what the sky was doing. In the summer of 1993, Orion-7 malfunctioned. Not catastrophically, not obviously. The satellite continued to transmit, the data continued to arrive. But something in the imaging array had shifted. A calibration error, the initial assessment concluded, causing the instrument to capture a wavelength band it was not intended to capture. Instead of atmospheric data, Orion-7 was sending back surface imaging, ground-level infrared. detailed, high resolution, and arriving on a continuous feed that the automated systems were dutifully processing and filing without any human having looked at it. Philip Crane looked at it. His first notation, dated August 14, 1993, is brief. Written in the same precise hand as the index, it reads, Orion-7 feed reviewed. Calibration error confirmed. Surface imaging, infrared band, coordinates covering North Atlantic landmass sectors 7 through 19. Flagging for recalibration request. Note, unusual surface textures visible in sectors 11, 14 and 17. Possibly artifacting. Will review next transmission cycle. The word possibly is underlined. Lightly. The kind of underlining a methodical man does when he is not yet willing to commit to doubt, but cannot quite bring himself to leave the word unqualified. The next notation is 3 days later. Reviewed second transmission cycle. Artifacting hypothesis not supported. Structures in sectors 11, 14 and 17 are consistent across both cycles. They are not instrument error. They are present on the ground. Dimensions estimated at between 400 and 900 meters across. Organic in appearance. No straight edges, no geometric regularity. Recommend escalation to senior review. There is no record of a senior review being conducted. There is, however, a notation 4 days after that, in a hand slightly less precise than the earlier entries. The hand, I have come to believe, of a man who has not been sleeping well. Third cycle reviewed. Structures have changed position. Not significantly, tens of meters at most, between the August 14th imaging and today's. But they have moved. I have measured this 3 times. I have checked the coordinate data 3 times. They have moved. The fourth notation is not dated. It reads only this. There are more of them. Act 2. The structures. I want to tell you what the images looked like, because the second folder contained prints. Thermal imaging printouts, the kind produced by the processing equipment of the early 1990s. Slightly grainy, high contrast, the kind of image that renders the world in shades of orange and black, and the particular sickly yellow of things that retain heat when they should not. Crane had annotated each one in his precise hand, marking coordinates, scale indicators, the date and cycle number of each transmission. I have looked at a great many documents in my career. I am not, by nature or habit, a person given to imagination. I mention this not as a boast, but as context, so that you understand the weight of what I am about to say. The structures were wrong. Not wrong in the sense of unexpected or anomalous or difficult to classify. Wrong in a more fundamental sense. The kind of wrong that the eye registers before the brain has formed the question. They covered the ground in the affected sectors the way a living thing covers a surface. Not planted, not built, but grown. Vast, spreading forms with the irregular density of root systems or fungal networks, branching and rejoining in patterns that suggested organization without suggesting geometry. They had what I can only describe as texture, visible even in thermal imaging, a surface that was not flat, not smooth, that caught and held heat in ways that the surrounding terrain did not. And they were large. Crane's scale notations indicated the smallest visible structure at approximately 400 meters across. The largest, in Sector 14, he had measured at just under 2 kilometers. I checked his measurements against the coordinate grids 3 times, the way he had checked the movement data 3 times. His measurements were correct. The fifth notation, the first one with a date after the undated fourth, is from September 2nd, 1993. Crane had by this point, based on the density of his annotations on the image prints, been studying the transmissions for 18 days without, as far as I can tell, reporting his findings to anyone beyond his initial escalation request, which had received no response. The notation reads, "Coverage has expanded. Sectors 9, 12, 15 and 18 now showing early stage structures, consistent with what sectors 11, 14 and 17 showed in the August 14th cycle. If the rate of expansion is consistent, full coverage of the monitored landmass area within approximately 60 days. I do not know what this means. I have tried to find precedent in the literature. There is none. I have tried to find someone in this division who will discuss it with me. I have been told, twice now, that the Orion-7 feed has been reclassified and that I am no longer authorized to access it. He accessed it anyway. This is clear from the subsequent notations. Whatever reclassification had been applied to the official feed, Crane had, at some point between September 2nd and September 9th, found a means of continuing to receive the data. He does not describe how. He describes only what he saw. The structures in sectors 11, 14 and 17, the original sites, had changed again. Not in position this time, in configuration. The branching forms had thickened, densified, developed what Crane described in his notation as vertical elements, protrusions rising from the main mass, oriented upward, of varying heights. He had sketched one in the margin of his notation. I looked at the sketch for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. They were reaching. The September 14th notation is the longest Crane wrote. It runs to 3 pages, the handwriting progressively less controlled as it continues. He had, by this point, gone back through the archived Orion-7 data and found that the calibration error, the supposed malfunction that had redirected the imaging array, had not begun in the summer of 1993. It had begun in 1987. 6 years of surface imaging, filed and unreviewed, sitting in the automated processing archive while the official data went elsewhere. 6 years of transmissions that no one had looked at, because no one was supposed to look at them. Because the calibration error was not, Crane had now concluded, an error at all. Someone redirected this array deliberately, the notation reads, in 1987, and someone has been receiving this data for 6 years. I do not know who. I do not know what they have done with it. I know only that the structures visible in the 1987 data are unrecognizable compared to what is visible now. In 1987, they were small, dispersed, barely distinguishable from natural ground features. Whatever they are, they have been growing for at least 6 years, possibly longer. The 1987 data may not be the beginning. The notation ends there, except for one final line, written at a slight angle to the rest, as though added after the page had been set down and picked up again. I have requested a meeting with the division director. I have been told he is unavailable. I have been told I should take some leave. I have been told very politely that I seem tired. I am not tired. Act 3. The Sound. The third folder contained one document, a single typed page on division letterhead dated October 3rd, 1993, a memorandum from the office of the division director addressed to the personnel department. The subject line read, Re. Dr. Philip Crane, extended leave of absence. The body of the memorandum was 4 sentences. Dr. Crane had, effective September 30th, taken an indefinite leave of absence for reasons of personal health. His access credentials had been suspended for the duration. His workstation had been cleared and reassigned. Any correspondence directed to him at the division address should be returned to sender. There is no record of Philip Crane after October 3rd, 1993. Not in the division personnel files. Not in any public record I have been able to locate. No forwarding address. No subsequent employment. No death certificate. He had a sister. I found her name in his personnel file, listed as emergency contact, and I searched for her as well. She died in 2019. Her obituary is brief and says nothing about a brother. I want to be precise about what this means and what it does not mean. It does not necessarily mean that Philip Crane was killed. People disappear from records for many reasons. People choose to disappear. People fall through the gaps that exist in every administrative system, even careful ones. I am an archivist. I know better than most how easily a person can cease to exist on paper while continuing to exist in fact. I have told myself this many times in the months since I opened that box. The magnetic tape was the last item. I should not have played it. The reel was unlabeled, like the box, and the processing equipment required to read it is not standard issue in a municipal records office. I sourced a compatible playback unit from a specialist. I told myself it was due diligence, that a complete record required all materials to be reviewed, that this was simply thoroughness. I played it on a Tuesday afternoon in March, alone in the processing room, with the door closed and the overhead light doing what overhead lights do in small rooms, making the space feel both too bright and somehow not bright enough. The tape ran for 22 minutes. The first 19 were what Crane's handwritten label on the tape case described: atmospheric audio captured by the Orion-7 array during the September 1993 transmission cycle. This was, to my understanding, an experimental function of the satellite, not standard equipment, not widely documented, a prototype sensor package testing the viability of acoustic data collection at altitude. What it produced sounded, for the first 19 minutes, exactly as one would expect. Wind. The particular broadband hiss of high-altitude atmospheric movement. Distant electrical interference from the storm systems visible in the imaging data. White noise, essentially. The sound of weather being weather. At the 19-minute mark, something changed. Not abruptly, not with the clean editorial cut of a recording spliced together from two sources. It changed the way weather changes, gradually, continuously, so that by the time I became aware that something was different, I could not identify the precise moment the difference had begun. The wind was still there. The atmospheric hiss was still there. But beneath it, woven into it, inseparable from it, present in the frequencies that the ear does not process as sound so much as feels as pressure, was something else. I listened for 2 minutes before I understood what I was hearing. Voices. Not one voice, not two. A density of voices so extreme that the individual human components were indistinguishable from each other, compressed by sheer number into something that the ear processed first as texture, then as tone, then, slowly, horribly, with the creeping inevitability of a diagnosis you have known was coming for months, as what it actually was. People. Thousands of them, perhaps more. Their voices not raised in conversation, not overlapping in the ordinary cacophony of crowds, but unified, aligned, in a single sustained sound that had no language in it, no words, no structure that I could identify as anything other than the most fundamental human vocalization. A sound that a person makes when language is no longer available to them. I stopped the tape. I sat in the processing room for a long time. The overhead light continued to do what it did. The room continued to be the size it was. I was, by every measurable criterion, exactly where I had been before I pressed play. I have since gone back through Crane's final notations, the ones from late September, the ones where the handwriting deteriorates, looking for any reference to the audio data. I found one. A single line, on the last page of the last notation, below everything else, in handwriting so compressed it took me 3 readings to pass. It read, "The sound is not coming from the sky. The satellite is capturing it from the ground, from the sectors, from inside the structures." I filed the box. I completed my digitization log. I drove home in the ordinary way, on ordinary roads, through a city that looked exactly as it always had. The buildings and the streets and the people moving between them, going about the unremarkable business of being alive. I have not listened to the tape again. I have not needed to, because I know now, in the way that certain knowledge settles into a person not as a thought, but as a physical fact, a weight in the chest that does not lift. I know what Philip Crane knew in that processing room in September 1993, alone with his infrared prints and his precise handwriting and his monstrous, irrefutable data. The structures are still there. They were there in 1987 when the array first found them. They were there in 1993 when Crane measured them and sketched their reaching forms and listened to what lived inside them. They have had 32 years since then, growing at whatever rate they grow, expanding into whatever sectors they have expanded into, filling the ground beneath cities and roads and ordinary lives with their vast, patient, organic mass. And the sound that Crane heard in the atmospheric data, the sound beneath the wind, the density of voices, thousands of them, unified in that single sustained note that has no language and no words, and nothing in it that could be called human expression except its origin. I hear it sometimes, at the edge of sleep, in the particular silence of a room where the heating has clicked off and the street outside has gone quiet, and there is nothing at all, to account for the low, continuous resonance that seems to come not from outside the walls, but from below the floor, from the ground, from whatever is in it. Philip Crane disappeared on September 30th, 1993. He was 38 years old. He was methodical, thorough, and disinclined toward speculation. He had been exactly right about everything. The box is filed, the tape is logged, the reference number is real, and it belongs to a subsection that appears in no index. And if you work in records long enough, in the right building, you may one day come across a box with no label. Do not play the tape. 3 acts, 1 man, 1 box without a label. Philip Crane was methodical, thorough, and disinclined toward speculation. His personnel review said so. He was precisely the kind of person you would want looking at anomalous data, careful enough to measure twice, disciplined enough to distrust his own conclusions until the evidence made distrust impossible. He was, in every professional sense, the right man for the work. And it made no difference whatsoever. That is what stays with me. Not the structures, vast and organic and patient in their infrared orange, spreading across sectors like something that has never once considered the possibility of being stopped. Not the tape, and what is on it in those final 3 minutes beneath the wind. Not even Crane himself, alone in that processing room, writing smaller and smaller, as though if he made the letters small enough, the thing they described might shrink with them. What stays with me is the arithmetic. 1987 to now. 38 years of growth, unobserved, unrecorded, beneath the ground that every one of us walks on every day without a second thought. 38 years since the array first found them, small then, dispersed, barely distinguishable from natural features. Crane measured them in 1993 at 400 meters, at 2 kilometers, growing at a rate he documented across 6 transmission cycles before they took his access away. Do the arithmetic yourself. I find I prefer not to. Check your locks tonight. Draw your curtains. Go about the ordinary business of being alive in a world that looks, from the surface, exactly as it always has. The streets are the same. The buildings are the same. The people moving between them are going about their lives with the same unremarkable persistence they always have. This has been flashlight in the dark. The box is still there. The tape is still there. And somewhere beneath you, right now, in the dark that no satellite has mapped in 32 years, so are they. If this account found its way to you tonight, if something in it settled behind your eyes and refused to leave, then you know what to do. Leave a light on. Stay close. And if you are still here, still listening, still willing to come back when I call, there is a button below this, a small thing. It costs you nothing, and it means more than you know. Press it. And if you have not yet found your way to this channel before tonight, the door is open. It is always open. One last thing before the silence. Philip Crane heard something on that tape and understood it immediately. I have told you what I believe that means, but I want to know what you believe. Not about the structures, not about the sound, about Crane himself. Do you think he disappeared because they silenced him? Or because, having heard what was on that tape, he simply went to find it? Leave your answer below. I will be reading. I will be waiting.